Hi guys, I'm Kasha. Welcome to my channel, to my wonderland, and today I'm here to talk to you about It Chapter 2.
It's coffee time!
So if you guys are not new to my channel, you probably know that I love horror, I love Stephen King, and despite my first thoughts when the very first Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise picture came out, where I was a little bit skeptic, after watching chapter 1 in 2017, I was hooked, in love, and I've been waiting 2 years to watch the second part, and I've been dying. I've been counting the hours. I got a ticket for the first screening that they were doing in the city where I live, in English, and I went there, and lucky for me there were not many people there. There were around 15 to 20 people, including myself, and so I had a great experience in the cinema, and I really enjoyed the movie. So I'm here today to talk to you about my thoughts on the movie and some Easter eggs. Alright, let's get first to some facts. This is an American horror supernatural movie based on the horror novel by Stephen King, It, that came out in 1986. The first part we got in 2017, and Andy Muschietti repeats obviously as a director for part 2 that was just released on the 5th of September 2019. So if you're familiar with It by Stephen King, you know that it is an entity, that it's basically these 3 dead lights, and he can take any type of form, and he always looks for something that is gonna scare you, so he can always become your worst fear. And he comes every 27 years to feed, and then goes back and rests, and then comes back again. And so as we saw at the end of It Chapter 1, the losers decided to come back in 27 years if it was not dead. So in the second part of the movie, we are basically taking off after those 27 years have passed, and It is back. Back in 1990, we got a mini-series of It, and Pennywise was played by the fantastic Tim Curry, and it was really hard to pick up the character after that. That mini-series was supposed to be an 8-hour long 4-part series, but they decided to do it just a 2-part of 6 hours of 3 and 3. And back then, this is a mini-series that was aired in television, so they were kind of restrained when it comes to the gore and the blood, so it was PG-13, and they couldn't go as far as they wanted to with certain things, because making a Stephen King movie PG-13 is not always that easy, especially with something like It, which at some parts it gets a little bit brutal in the book. And now Andy Muschietti has finally given us, the fans of Stephen King and the book, an R-rated movie with blood, some gore. And I know that some people might have thought that some parts were just funny and not horrific, but I think it's the perfect combination what he has achieved in part 2. I think the first one, we all felt it was more horror because you were seeing everything all the time from the perspective of a kid, which tend to be more scared of these things, and now we were living it from the perspective of kids but also adults, and adults tend to have less fears when it comes to these things. So that might be why, but I thought that the horror was on point. The plot of our movie is very simple. It's basically, we are 27 years after the losers defeated It, and Mike is the only one that has stayed in Derry for all this time, and he's still soaked into Derry, into the history. And one day there is a murder, there is committed, and he realizes that It and Pennywise are back. So we see that Mike starts to call all the losers one by one, and that was really well done because they were kind of like intertwining all the different stories of where they are right now, Bev and Richie and Stanley and everybody. And I thought the whole, takes, how it was filmed, it was so smart, and I absolutely loved it. So Mike basically calls all the losers and asks them to please come back because Pennywise is back. but the only problem is that once you leave Derry, you forget about what happened there. And so nobody but Mike remembers what happened that summer. So we have Mike that, as I mentioned before, he decided to stay in Derry, and it's the one that has been soaking up all of the history and everything that has been happening and trying to find out a way to kill it when he comes back. Then we have Bill that has become this famous author that writes novels, and we see him when one of his novels is being turned into a film. Then we have Eddie that turned up to, you know, marry somebody that is exactly like his mom. And fun fact is that the actress that played his mom in part 1 is actually the one that plays his wife in part 2. Then we have Richie that seems not to have grown up at all, and he's a stand-up comedian, and the work that Bill Hader did in this character is so amazing. Next we have Ben, which is the one that has changed the most because he has lost all of those pounds and now is this super sexy architect, you know, very successful, rich. And then we have Stanley that is happily married, and fun fact is that when we get to see him, the camera comes from under a table and it shows us that he is playing building up a puzzle with birds, and that is a hint to the book and the first mini-series because he loved to do bird watching. So that's kind of like a little hint to that. There are so many things like this throughout the whole movie that if you read the book, you know why Andy chose specific things in specific moments, because they're all like winks to the book. As for Beverly, she lives with her husband, also very successful. They have a lot of money, but her husband is exactly like his dad. She ended up marrying somebody that is an abusive, possessive man, and it's because when she was a kid, when she was growing up, she got the wrong impression of what love is, and she ended up basically marrying her worst nightmare. Next, let's talk about the casting. And for these movies, part 1 and specifically part 2, the casting is one of the most flawless castings I have ever seen in my life. All the kids, and also including the bully Henry Bowers, the adults that they chose to play these characters are so similar that at some points I was watching them and I'm like, I cannot believe it's not the same actor, just older, because it just feels like it. Like Ben's face, it's exactly the same. Sometimes Mike was on screen, I'm like, it looks exactly like the kid. And Henry Bowers, I mean, that guy, he did such an amazing job. So not only were the actors amazing when it comes to the acting, but the casting when it comes to matching the kids was fantastic. And I did hear in interviews that the actors that were gonna play the adult version decided to study the kids from the first movie by watching it and seeing which kind of tics they had and try to take those to their characters in part 2. And also the actor that plays Ben when he's older, he said that he really wanted the director to include the part where we see Beverly talking to Ben at the very beginning when they meet and calls him the new kid, because he thought that's something that marked a difference for Ben in the first movie. So I love that they were so involved with the movie, the older actors, and that they really paid attention to a lot of details to be able to be as exact as possible and, you know, really match the kids. For me, the top 3 performances were obviously Bill Skarsgård, because he's insanely talented. Also James McAvoy, who has become, since I saw Split and Glass, one of my favorite actors, just because his acting is out of this world. And the third one is the actor that plays the older Henry Bowers. I don't remember his name right now, but he is insanely amazing in this movie as well. I was really impressed by his performance. Things that I really loved about this movie is basically that Andy Muschietti took a lot of time to give us a lot of character development. I thought this is something that is really important for it, you know, in the book as well as in both part 1 and part 2, because Stephen King has books that are full of characters, and in some books, like in It, the character development, the character growth, the character arc was so important that I think Andy understood that, and gave us what we needed to, you know, really be rooting for those characters. And I think this is also one of the reasons why the movie ended up being a little bit longer, apart that from the book that it's like around 1,400 pages or a little bit over that. I think Andy Muschietti did a great job, and it was not an easy one. I think in part 2 he had a harder, you know, job to decide which scenes to include or to delete, and it ended up being a really great cut in my opinion, because we got to see the development of each single character. They all had their little time, and we still got the whole huge end fight with it slash Pennywise, and so I think that he did a great job. So I understand that a lot of people say this movie was too long, was dragging, because it was 2 hours and 49 minutes, but you needed to get the stories from every kid and from every adult. It was important for, you know, the ending. It was important to understand as well which tokens they needed to defeat it. It was just necessary, and for me it didn't feel like a super long movie. Honestly, I don't know why people have a problem with this one, but they didn't complain about Endgame, because it was also a movie that was really long, and you know, I didn't feel in any of them that they were dragging. I'm just going to blame this again to the era that we are living in, where everything has to be action all the time and fast and bye-bye, you know, and we can no longer just sit down and enjoy a 3-hour-long movie that it's just really well executed. Like, we just need to get to the end, see what happens, okay, bye, and that's not the point. And like I said, I thought that all the scenes that he chose were necessary. Another thing that I really appreciated was all the references to other horror movies like Lost Boys and The Shining. I will talk a little bit more of that on the spoiler section of this review. And if I have to mention something that I did not like so much, but that was 100% necessary, is that for the kids in chapter 2 they had to use de-aging with CGI, and they also changed the pitch of the voice. I didn't know this before I went into the cinema, because I was watching some interviews with the cast, and they did mention that they had to de-age them and raise their pitch of their voices. And you know, it's necessary, because the flashbacks that you see in It Chapter 2 to the summer of 1989 are flashbacks where the kids should look exactly like they did in part 1. And some of the actors, especially Finn Wolfhard that plays Richie, he's changed so much. His face is basically super skinny now. He's lost all the baby fat. And so they had to add the fat back. And if you know this, you probably notice. If you don't know this, you might not notice, because it's really well done and it was probably a lot of work, but I think it was really necessary, because the whole face structure really changed, especially for the boys, or a couple of the boys, and I think it was really necessary. But obviously it's one of the things that you might like less, because if you know it, you notice it, and you cannot help but notice that it is CGI. Now let's go to the spoiler part of this review. So if you have not watched chapter 2 and you don't like to be spoiled, this is the time where you will be leaving this review and come back later once you've watched the movie. So let's start after that warning. Basically, the chapter 2 movie starts with a very important scene that was also very important in the book, and it is actually something that really happened and that Stephen King took from the news and put it in his novel, which he has done this many times to find like cases in real life of violence and include them in his books, changing things up a little bit. And that is the opening scene where we see these gay couple that are in the fair, and they are being attacked by a couple of bullies, and they end up being beaten up, and one of them is being thrown to the river. And that's the first time that we get to see Pennywise, and it's kind of starting like the first movie. We have Henry Bowers terrorizing Ben, so we're starting again with the root of evil and the bullying. And that first scene when you see Pennywise and how gory it is when he just like bites this guy and kind of laughs, I was already so excited for this movie. And this opening scene is telling us that evil is back in Derry after 27 years, and that is when Mike decides to call all of our losers back into Derry. And I love the fact that they had to look for something that was really important to them, to help them remember in order to be able to defeat it. You know what they say about Derry? Nobody that dies here ever leaves. I will always quote that line, always will love it. And I think this sequence where the losers are each of them looking for that token that they need to use for the ritual was amazing. This is where we got to see each adult version when they were kids, so we got all of these flashbacks, and you know, we get to understand a little bit more what happened in the summer of 1989. This is kind of like filling the gaps from the first movie, and it was done wonderfully. It felt a little bit like a compilation of little horror stories, like Goosebumps style, and I absolutely loved it. They also bring back a lot of the things that happened in chapter 1. We see Richie and Eddie confronted again with the 3 doors, and not scary at all. Scary and very scary. And in part 1 we saw like the severed corpse, and we saw the upper part hanging, and now we see the legs. Fantastic. We also get again the whole blood topic with Beverly. In the first movie it was also kind of to you know, to let us know that she was growing up and turning into a woman, and now I loved the blood scene with Beverly when she's locked up in that toilet stall and the door starts to open while the blood starts to fill up. You see the 3 people that terrorized her when she was younger: her father, the pharmacist, and Henry Bowers, and I absolutely loved that scene. It was fantastic. About the more horror part, like jump scares and the gore, I appreciated that this movie was a bit more disturbing. There was a bit more of gore. Of course you can always make it more bloody than it was, but I was really satisfied. And also the jump scares, I mean, you were kind of knowing that they were there, that they were coming, but I think Andy Muschietti did such a great job to make you expect the jump scare, not give it to you, and then surprise you. And I heard a lot of people in the cinema screaming. I could feel my seat moving because people were like jumping off their seats, and I was loving all of that. I was just enjoying everybody's fear in the cinema. That's the weirdo that I am, and I was just smiling and enjoying it. I absolutely loved every bit of it, like especially when Pennywise is kind of luring this little girl and telling her that he can fix this scar that she has in her face, and he's counting to 3 and you know it's coming, but then he stops counting and you don't know when it's gonna come anymore, and it's still a jump scare that you know it's coming, but it's a little bit unpredictable, and it was fantastic. Now let's go to check a couple of references, cameos, and things that happened. So first of all, I would like to mention that I believe it was in Ben's desk, or I think it appeared even twice in chapter 2. There is a little tortoise statue, and this is in reference to Stephen King's lore, because in Stephen King's universe there is this big turtle that basically puked the world, he puked the earth in which we live today, and it is the arch enemy of it. And so in chapter 1 we saw a turtle built with the Legos that Bill steps on, and in chapter 2 we see it on the desk, and I absolutely love this. I knew they wanted to include the turtle in part 2, but they were not sure and they decided not to do it. It is a very abstract concept but it is part of, you know, the history of it. The cameos are first Peter Bogdanovich, that appears as the director, that is adapting one of Bill's books. Then we obviously have Stephen King on the bike shop, and this was a especially sweet cameo. And the other one was Andy Muschietti himself at the drugstore, at the pharmacy, while Eddie is going there to pick up his prescription. And now let's talk about the Stephen King cameo, because I absolutely loved it, and obviously the moment that Stephen King was on screen, I heard from the back in the theater, "That's Stephen King," and I'm like, no joke. And I absolutely loved him because it had a purpose. The purpose being, Stephen King always writes, or most of the time he has a character in his books that is a writer, because it's his way of, you know, writing himself into the story. And also the character of Bill is an author that everybody tells, "Oh, I like your books, but the endings always suck," which is something that people used to tell to Stephen King. So the fact that now he's saying that to Bill in that scene, it is hilarious. And I guess, you know, not everybody might get the joke, but I absolutely loved it. And it is a scene that is in the book. Bill does go on the town and sees the bike on this showcase and decides to go in and grab it because it's his bike from when he was a kid. So it's not like they did this extra scene just for Stephen King, but I think it fits so well, and I understand why they did this scene so long, and you know, it had a purpose. There were many references in this movie to other horror movies. We saw a poster of The Lost Boys. There's a couple of The Shining references, and then we can see the pattern of the Overlook Hotel rug on the bottom of this skateboard that the kid has that Bill is trying to protect. Also Henry Bowers, when Beverly is being held in this toilet stall and the door opens and she gets to see all these bloody faces from the three men that were predators to her. Henry Bowers says, "Here's Johnny," so you know what he's referencing to. And obviously there is also a reference to The Thing, because we see Stanley's face and then it grows the spider legs and starts running around just like it happened in The Thing. There are also many winks to the book. Too many for me to remember right now as well, because I've only watched the movie once, but I'm gonna go back really soon to watch it again, obviously, because I need it. I need my fix. One of the things I really appreciated is that in the book, the kids that Pennywise has kind of lured into the sewers are not floating like we saw in the first movie. They're kind of like in a spiral, kind of like in a tornado shape. In the book, they are basically just floating around on the sewers on the water, which is more creepy and bloody and disgusting. And there is a little scene when we're seeing the flashback to the story, background story of Henry Bowers, where we see that he's been basically thrown out of the sewers with all of the dirty water and all of the kids floating around here, all of the dead kids, and I absolutely love that. And I thought immediately of the book, and that is a wink to how the kids are really being like portrayed in the book, where Pennywise has them. About possibility of another movie, Andy Muschietti has been asked obviously a lot, and he says that for the book chapter is ended, but that there is so much to tell about Pennywise. So everybody was like, are we getting a Pennywise spin-off? Because everybody is kind of wanting it. We will see. He did say though that he's planning on doing a supercut of the first movie together with the second movie, and then adding all the scenes that he had to cut out, so we would get like a 6.5-hour movie in total. I'm gonna give this movie a 9 out of 10. I wanted to give it a 10 or a 20, but I'm gonna take a couple of points off for, you know, little details like having to de-age the kids that can get a little bit distracting, and some of the horror that maybe was not scary for everybody as it could have been, but I still really loved it. I freaking loved it. And I really encourage you to go and check it out and, you know, get your own opinion on the movie. Might not be for everybody. You also need to remember that this is a movie where the main character that is terrorizing is a clown, and it's not always easy to make a good movie that it's a horror movie with clowns. And I still think that Andy Muschietti took a book that was really complex, really complicated, really thick, and made a beautiful movie 1 and 2. I think he's done an amazing job. So you guys, this was my It Chapter 2 review. I really hope that you enjoyed it. Let me know down below all your thoughts in this movie or in It by Stephen King in general. Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks so much for your support. Please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and also remember to click on the notification bell so you don't miss any more coffee times with me. Please also feel free to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All the links to my social media can be found in the description box down below. And I hope to see you all in the next coffee time. Bye!